is a Rashi Sicha, and it's a brilliant Rashi Sicha. From a strictly Rashi perspective, what the Rebbe does is so masterful. It's just so good. And it's what the Rebbe does brilliantly. But we're not learning Rashi. My endeavor here is not to learn Rashi. My endeavor is to learn the spirit. Because what we do is we do a Sicha a week, which means you don't finish it. We just skim it. We do a little bit of the Sicha. And we are learning the timeline of the Torah sequentially. In other words, 2 years ago we did Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yankee. We went through the story of the Yavas. Last year, technically, we went through the story of Yosef and his brothers, and it spilled over a little bit into this year. Now we're doing what we're calling Exile and Redemption. This is, if you go to my website, you'll see I have a Sicha section, and in the Sicha section there's a subsection called Themes. You click Themes, you'll see these classes organized. So we're now doing what's called Exile and Redemption. We learned many things. We learned about the nature of the exile. We learned about different stages of the exile. And we also learned about the Redeemer. The last 2 classes, or last 3 classes, have been about Moshe. And the qualifications that Moshe Rabbeinu had to be the Redeemer. And what's interesting is that the most powerful qualification Moshe had to be the Redeemer was that he didn't suffer at all in the Golus, which almost doesn't seem fair. He was above it, totally above it. And the Rebbe explained this and argued it and proved it, that Moshe Rabbeinu is able to redeem us as he's completely, altogether, above the exile. We also discussed the significance of Moshe Rabbeinu being placed in the river, the Nile, that his mother placed him on the reeds because she couldn't take him into the river proper because there was an Avodah Zarah. When Bas Pare came there to immerse herself to become a Jewess, so the Nilus stopped being an Avodah Zarah and Moshe's body floats into the Nilus itself, from which she retrieves it. And the Rebbe explained a very significant meaning from this, that Moshe Rabbeinu's being placed in the river Nile broke the decree against Moshe Rabbeinu, against the firstborn, against the sons, but it also broke the klipa of Mitzrayim. We learned that sikh as well. And there's another sikh also we learned about the nature of Moshe Rabbeinu's immortality. Moshe Rabbeinu is living forever. This is the sikh of Moshe Rabbeinu's early life. And what the Rebbe does in the sikha is he extracts from Moshe Rabbeinu's early life a dual greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, and that the dual greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu are both from birth. From birth, Moshe Rabbeinu had 2 outstanding areas which represented the 2 parts of his leadership of the Jewish people. Okay? Now what's the story of Moshe Rabbeinu's birth? Moshe Rabbeinu was born on the day that it was decreed that every male child born is to be thrown into the river Nile, including Egyptian children. He was so desperate, Padre, based on this, what the stargazers were telling him, if a boy is born on this day, throw him into the river. Yocheved got away with this. Why? Because Yocheved had separated from Amram, and everybody knew she separated from Amram, because, I should say, Amram separated from Yocheved, because Amram was the leader of the generation. And a young little girl by the name of Miriam came along to her father and said, you know what? You're a bigger Rasha than Pare. Pare is killing boys, you're killing everybody, because all men separated from their wives. So Amram remarries Yocheved, and Moshe Rabbeinu is born. Moshe Rabbeinu is born prematurely. Moshe Rabbeinu was born in the 7th month, 6 months and a day. So the Egyptian baby seekers did not bother to visit her until 9 months after her wedding. By this point, Moshe was virtually 3 months old. So she puts him in the wicket basket, she places him in the river Nile, the whole story. Vasya Baspari finds him, she takes him home, and she's endeared to this child, she loves him. He's gorgeous. She sees that he's beautiful. There's the spirit of the Shekhinah upon him. He was circumcised. And she wants to keep him. She has a problem. He refuses to nurse. So Miriam, the 5-year-old little maidel, who was the reason Moshe was born in the first place, never lets him out of her sight. When his mother placed him in the basket, she goes home. Miriam sits and watches. When Basia Baspari picks him up, she watches. She follows Basia with the baby back to the palace. And she pays attention. And she discovers that Moshe is crying, he's not eating. So she intervenes. And she says to Basia Baspare, perhaps he only likes Jewish milk. Maybe it's sweeter or saltier or has a greater fat content. Very likely. And Bas says, yeah. So she calls Yocheved. And of course, Yocheved doesn't say, oh, this is my child. Yocheved says, I'm a nursemaid. Would you like me to nurse your baby? Sure. So Yocheved takes Moshe Rabbeinu home. So Moshe grows up in his mother's house. And she raises him. Eventually, she can't keep him anymore. Basia Baspare wants him back. And she takes him back. And what follows is a series of psukim, just a few. The first one says, Vayigdal Moshe. I'll read it from the Chumash. Vayigdal Ayeled, the boy grew up. Vatavayela Vaspare, and Yocheved brings him back to the daughter of the Pharaoh. Vayilalavein, and she became like a son to him. Vatikra Shmai Moshe, she calls him Moshe. Why? Vatemer, she explained, Kimin Amayim, and she said, I pulled him out of the water. The next pasuk says, Vayi Bayamim Ahem, in those times, Vayigdal Moshe grew up. Vayetzi Alecha, he went out to his brothers. So you have two psukim, one after the next. The first pasuk says, Moshe grew up, and he was brought back to the palace. The next pasuk says, Moshe grew up, and he left the palace to be with his friend, with a fellow Jew. So it actually wants to know what's the difference between the first Vayigdal and the second Vayigdal. Vayigdal Ayela, the child grew up, and then Vayigdal Moshe grew up. So now, you know how we do this already. We read only what I underlined. Okay? And if you'll read what I underlined, you won't lose me. If you read other things, you will lose me. So on page 20, Vayigdal Moshe, Vayigdal Ayela. There's two psukim, one after the next. The first one says, the boy grew up. The second one says, Moshe grew up. So Rashi explains, Harisha lekaima, v'achsheni legedul. The first Vayigdal Ayel means he became tall. Kaima, tall, erect. And the second one means he was made prominent. Sheminu pari al beisei, the Pharaoh made him the overseer of his house. Okay? So Vayigdal, he grew up, and then he grew up, so to speak, metaphysically, and the Pharaoh makes him a macher in his house. Page 22. So Rashi's question, the Rebbe's question was, why does it say twice Vayigdal? What is the meaning of these two Vayigdal? So the Rebbe says in the bottom of the first column, page 22, something very, very interesting. That Pasuk Zogt Vayibayam Mahem. The Pasuk says, it was on those very days that Vayigdal Moshe grew up. What's the problem? Since this pasuk Vayigdal Moshe is written immediately after Nachen pasuk Vayigdal Ayela, the boy grew up, it means as the Vayigdal Moshe is given by Yamim Ahem from Frier, non zum Zman from Vayigdal Ayela. Because it says the boy grew up, and in those days it says Moshe grew up, that both Vayigdals happened almost at the same time. That's what's bothering Rashi. Vayigdal Ayel means the boy grew up and he was brought home. Vayigdal Ayel, the boy grew up and he wanted to see his brothers. Everybody understands. He grew up means he didn't need a nursemaid anymore. He grew up that he can go out into the street. But because it says Vayi Vayam Mehem, it was at the same time, so Rashi assumes that the two Vayigdals were almost simultaneous. He was old enough to live in the Pharaoh's house. He was old enough to see his brothers. Were almost at the same time. And Rashi doesn't understand, how could you have two Vayigdals near one another that are happening at the same time? Why do you have both of them? Next reading. The Rebbe is Rashi Mefarash Arishan Lakeim Vashem Ledul. Actually, therefore interprets the first one means he became tall, the second one means he was appointed to a position of prominence. In other words, not that they happened one after the next. Moshe experienced two Vayigdal simultaneously. Number one, he physically grew up. Number two, he was made important. The Iker Chidush is in them is nid beneged Vayigdal von unser pasuk. The primary novelty is not the second Vayigdal that he became prominent. Not as the Vayigdal from Friedrich and pasuk. The first Vayigdal meant Lekaima. Vayigdal doesn't mean he was weaned. He stopped being nursed. Vayigdal means he was tall. Vayigdal meint nit dem Gidel was noch ins Mana Yenika. Vayigdal doesn't mean the growth that follows the spirit of nursing. V'yazeta is ba'ashkafa l'sheila, as you would think initially. Not in this case, the first Vayigdal means Lekaima. When a kind wächst aus und wird a Gadol bekommen gepschutte, when a boy grows up and he becomes physically large. Was das is mit a Meshech Yaren noch dem Zman von Vayigdal. Since the two Vayigdals are considered simultaneous, because it says V'hi b'yama mahem, the first one cannot mean he was weaned, stopped nursing. Has to mean he was physically grown. So Rashi says Vayigdal Arishain is the koima, he became big, and Vayigdal Asheni he was made important. Look at the next reading, page 23. Uvibal Arishain is the koima. If the first Vayigdal means he was tall, if Shaim verstandig itself understood, was besmichos to dem Zman at the very same time, ken euch sein Vayigdal Moshe in Gedula b'chashivos. He became tall, even though he was only a young boy, but he was tall and he was handsome and he was smart. He became prominent. He became important. Here's how the Rebbe explains it. Bottom of page 23 now. We all understand that Bas Pare saved Moshe Rabbeinu because she wanted him for herself. Is moving as Yechever that him nid gekent verhalten, nor biswanen es ken sein giltig dam tam va maslana. Yechever can only keep him as long as she had an excuse. What was her excuse? Why she's keeping him at home? He's not nursing him. Why are you keeping him home? Says the Rebbe, next reading, was das is bizin gil for leben chamesh v'sheish, which is really till the age of 5 or 6, or the chol yes at the most. B'shtadlos, you say that Yechever to play good games, bis zum gil from Yiralvi Beishanesh. You couldn't keep him over past the age of 12 or 13. She's keeping Moshe. She would tell Bas Pari, he's weak and he's sickly, he needs his privacy, but you couldn't play that game forever. Either he was returned to the palace at the age of 6 or 7, but not later than 12 or 13. The question now becomes, wie es shayches zu sagen? How is it possible to say, as bald noch dem so Moshe in Azar, turn to page 24 now, junger Elter onkommen zu Gedula bechashivis, vasheni le Gedula. How could Moshe, who's only 12 and 13, be made so important? So it was a very pashut thing. What was the importance of Moshe Rabbeinu? The father's Rashi Mamshech, Rashi explains, as the Gedula b'shteit in them, the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu consists from the fact was minu Paltiel Beisei. Moshe was only given authority over the palace. He wasn't made a governor. He wasn't made an official of state. He was given the management of the palace. Why? He was young. He was handsome. And his daughter favored him. So he gave him a position. But a position that it was safe to give a 12-year-old. Says, he was never given a value and a greatness that affected the matters of state. Melucha. Not Amini Prati, a very specialized appointment. Or the Inyane bias from part of the domestic matters of part of his home. Was Azage Dulomine can sein Eich Bazar, was is noch sehr jung. You can give a teenager to oversee the palace, like Yosef was given that job. So the first Vayigdal means he became big. The second was at the very same time, he was already given a position of prominence, notwithstanding his youth, because it wasn't a real position of political power, he was just worrying about the palace. Next reading, when das meint Vayigdal Moshe, this is the meaning of Moshe grew up. Das ist a gadlos was gekommen mit zat chvivus. Moshe Rabbeinu was favored by Bas Pari. She liked him very much. To leave Moshe's chvivus to the Siyas came by Bas Pari. Since she was loved, he was loved, and he was considered charming and gracious to the daughter of Pari. She considered him like a son, not to get pale by Parin. Sheminu al Beisa. She came to her father and said, "Listen, this kid, he's so special. Give him something." So Pari put him into his palace. So what just happened? What just happened? I'll tell you what just happened. We have twice in a sequence the word "and he grew up." And by the way, you had the same thing by Yitzchak. And he grew up. But usually, the first "and he grew up" is when you turn 2 or 3, when you stop nursing. And the second "and he grew up" is when he became an adult. What happened here? Because of 3 words, Vayhi, Vayam, and Mahem, the first Vayigdal became later, and the second Vayigdal became earlier than normal. The first Vayigdal does not mean when he was weaned. The first Vayigdal means when he was tall. And the second Vayigdal doesn't mean he was mature. It just means he was given prominence. So we've seen in the Torah a boy grow up, and the Torah say 2 times Vayigdal. The first one means he's no longer nursing. The second one means he's a man. Here, because of 3 words, Vayhi, Vayam, Mahem, the first Vayigdal is pushed up, and the second Vayigdal is pushed down. The first Vayigdal, he's not 2 years old, he's 11 or 12, he's tall and handsome. And the second Vayigdal means even though he's only a boy, relatively speaking, he's made prominent. Okay? This is Rashi, and it's so interesting. We're skipping all the details, but there's so many questions that are resolved so brilliantly by the Rebbe in the Sichos, it's indescribable. Okay? Turn to page 26. Now, we're done with the Rashi. Done. That's it, Rashi. Now, what do I want to take to from what we just did? What I want you to take from what we just did is that by Moshe it says twice Vayigdal. They both happen at the same time, and they both happen before he's an adult. That's what I want you to take from this. There's 2 Vayigdals, right? They both happen at the same time, and they both happen before Moshe Rabbeinu was an adult. Now we move to mysticism. Page 26, right column where the underline is. These 2 concepts of greatness. The first one that he got tall, which is later than normal. The second one that was given a position of prominence, which happens earlier than normal. Express themselves in the tzvei inyanim in madreges Moshe beruchnius. You see them in the 2 ideas of Moshe, spiritually speaking. And what the message of the Sikha is, that Moshe is grown before he's grown. That's the message. Both Vayigdals are not adulthood. Both of them. The Vayhi Vayam Mahem doesn't allow it to mean adulthood. And the Rebbe says, in these 2 Vayigdals, Moshe grows up twice and he's still not grown. There's great significance. Because these 2 grown-upness before grown up reflects the 2 attributes of Moshe Rabbeinu as they happen in Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? And the Rebbe brings a Zayah. Bas Pare goes down to the river and she sees a basket and she can't reach it, right? So there's a whole detail in the Medrash. Bottom line, she opens the basket, finds a little boy inside. She sees a little boy and she really likes him. And she has some sense of what the little boy's mother, that means Yocheved, saw when she looked at Moshe Rabbeinu at the moment that he was born. That the pasuk says, "Vatera Likutei," Yocheved saw that he was good. So the Zayar brings 2 opinions what Tov means. Number 1, that he was circumcised, that he was gemalit. Number 2, that she sees the Shechina with him. So the Rebbe says these 2 Zayars, whether she saw that he was circumcised or she saw the Shechina with him, are not arguing. They're both true. She saw both things because Moshe has 2 distinctive characteristics. Bottom of page 26. Benegea the milas and madreges formation. In as much as Moshe Rabbeinu was considered great, gefindt mitzvei and yonim, we find 2 things. Number 1, zayin milo shleimus benegea la'atzmi, his own personal level, his own personal greatness. Is given the nifchar mikol mina adam, he was the greatest of all of humankind. Hechad in ganzen verwelt, altogether above the world. Kol kule davok am yochav dalakus, he's completely attached to godliness. So there's Moshe's personal greatness. Moshe's personal greatness has nothing to do with anything. Beis, zayin shleimus asraya, he was also the greatest shepherd of the people. Was erat mamshich mashpia gewesen, he drew down and gave. All physical and spiritual things. Top of page 27 now. zu Yidden, to the Jewish people, und durch Exile l'chol olam kulei, and indirectly the whole world. So Moshe's greatness as an individual is above the world. Moshe's greatness as a shepherd is his involvement in the world. Says the Rebbe, und die beide Sugi Meile seine bei ihm gewend begilui, taketh mishanel. As soon as Moshe is born, you see these two characteristics. What are they? Neilad Mol, weist as ein eigener Meile Shlemus. The fact that he was born circumcised shows how great he was as an individual. Ubeäufen von Heche verwelt is above the world, was das der Inyan von Neilad Mol, because the idea of being born circumcised is nit to say that Teva Elam is unnatural. As by im leicht begollet the Rebbe kiss, his neshama is so revealed in him, wie is in der on der Arla, as if he has no Arla, und dem hell of Yitzhahara, and therefore is born Mohel. So Moshe being born circumcised means she sees this kid is above the world completely. Und das was nehidu de Shchinta nahirbe, that he sees the light of the Shechina, is Ismalakol base of the whole home with all the Shechina's light, is the Mailu Shleimus for seine Ashpah of Haaretz Yidden, shows this influence on the Jewish people. So Moshe is a baby, and she immediately detects this is an unusual baby for two reasons. He's by himself the holiest of holy, and he will be a great Jewish servant, a great Jewish leader. So even though in the Zohar there's two opinions, there's a Rabbi Yossi and a Rabbi Chia, but the Rebbe says it's not really the Rebbe's father, it's not an argument, it's two aspects. So the Rebbe says that's the meaning of these two Vayigdals. He grew up before he was grown up, he became a leader before he was a leader, are the same two themes. His being grown up is his own personal greatness. His being appointed to a position of leadership before he was grown up is his being a leader. So what the Rebbe is teaching us here is that we already know that Moshe is different than most tzaddikim, because most tzaddikim become tzaddikim through their actions. Moshe was born a tzaddik, and his being a tzaddik showed itself at the moment of birth in both areas. He circumcised, and the Shekhinah is with him. And when he was a teenager, both of those areas were still identifiable. When you met the 12-year-old, the 11-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 9-year-old Moshe Rabbeinu, you saw his greatness, and you saw his concern for others. And that's the meaning of the two Vayigdals.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Very, very simple. Maybe I didn't ask it. How can she see, by opening the basket, that he has a breeze, but maybe somebody made him a breeze? How can she know that he was born with the breeze?
First of all, Teira Likutei says by Yocheved. Yocheved saw Sheh breeze. The two things were not seen by the soul. Yocheved saw them. As soon as Moshe was born, his mother saw them.
Okay.
Bas Pare saw that he was special. How she knew was Nehal, I don't know. Maybe they didn't do bris in Mitzrayim. They didn't do bris in Mitzrayim. Remember that she says where they had to do Korban Pesach, they all had to do bris. They didn't do bris in Mitzrayim. When they had to make the Korban Pesach, they had to circumcise themselves. But it's a question. It's a question.
Also, if she saw the Shechina, she was also special.
Very special. She was the daughter of Pare, became Jewish. Think about it.
So she became special at this moment before she took him, but she did this.
Well, she intended on becoming a Yiddish, so she was in the right way. Even before. Go ahead.
So I have a cousin who was apparently born with a birth, but that probably wouldn't have any significance, would it?
I think it has great significance. It happens. A certain percentage of people are born that way.
Yeah.
But it's considered a very great thing.
But they don't actually do a bris?
They have to draw a little blood.
Right.
But according to the Gemara, Isha Kamanam Hiladami, you know that?
That's right.
Every woman is considered with a bris. It's the halacha. It's negei and kamadinim. Korban Pesach you can't do unless you're not an arla. An arla.